seemed to me that there was a great opportunity here to do something that the comics can do, which is to really give them each their own palette, give them each their own way of speaking, their own fonts, their own world. And I issued a kind of insane directive to the art team, uh, Ilias Krianis and Chris Peters, our colorist, as well as our letterer, Taylor Esposito. And I said to them, I want each major character to have their own color scheme and to have their own font.
Hi, this is Henry Chamberlain, and I'm quite pleased to present to you Raymond Chandler's Trouble is My Business. We're going to be speaking with the author, Arvind Ethan David. Thank you so much for taking some time out.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Well, I wanted to have you do your elevator pitch to get people a little bit up to speed on what this graphic novel is about.
Well, Raymond Chandler, of course, creator of Philip Marlowe, is the sort of grandfather of noir, the granddaddy, the godfather, the creator, the elevator of the grand tradition of the American noir story. And this is one of the earliest ones. He first wrote this as a short story in 1939, before Philip Marlowe even existed. I think the original protagonist was called John Dallas. But then later on, after The Big Sleep, which of course made both him and Marlowe globally famous, he went back and revised many of his short stories, including Trouble, and put Marlowe in them. And so this is a sort of proto-Ur Philip Marlowe noir detective set in my version, in the early 1940s Los Angeles. And in one sense, it's a very typical noir detective tale. A detective gets hired by a rich man whose son has got into some trouble. He gets told the son's got involved with the wrong type of woman, they're gambling debts, and Marlowe's asked to sort it out, to do what is necessary, to smear the woman, to scare her off, and to make sure that the rich boy is kept safe. But as ever with Chandler and as ever with Noir, that's only the beginning. And quickly there are layers to the onion and mysteries within enigmas within riddles. And things get weirder and darker and much more interesting.
Well, that's such a wonderful way to begin. Yeah, I think about the Big Sleep, all the movie versions that have been made. Robert Mitchum, Elliot Gould, and I think of all the atmospherics. And so let me switch over to the actual book, which I want to show folks some pages, and that'll spark some conversation. Now, as I was just saying, the atmospherics are delicious, and you get to enjoy that as you put the adaptation together. And so I'm curious about the process. I did take some time to look back at the original, and so I see that you follow along where you need to follow along. You depart where you need to depart, like in the flashbacks. You create an actual flashback here and there, whatever is needed. So whatever might spark something from you now regarding the process. What would you like to say about how you went into this short story?
So, a few things. The first is Chandler was one of the great prose stylists of the 20th century. Almost nobody wrote dialogue as good as he did. The man wrote, as well as The Big Sleep, he wrote Double Indemnity, for God's sake. Like,
Yes.
If you're trying to write dialogue that goes next to his, you have to be a little insane and have some chutzpah. And so that was the first hurdle, was just to convince myself that I could do that. And so I read and reread everything. I rewatched everything. And that puts you in the mood. And the great thing about him is these are great characters. And once you're in their skin, you're not really writing them, they're living themselves. And it seemed to me that there was a great opportunity here to do something that the comics can do, which is to really give them each their own palette, give them each their own way of speaking, their own fonts, their own world. And I issued a kind of insane directive to the art team, Ilias Krianis and Chris Peters, our colorist, as well as our letterer, Taylor Esposito. And I said to them, I want each major character to have their own color scheme and to have their own font. And then they said, okay, but what happens when they talk to each other and are in the same room? And I'm like, I don't know. We're going to figure that out together. And so you'll see as you move from Marlowe's black and white world to Harriet Huntress, the femme fatale, her much more technicolor world, to the very grounded world of George Hasselman, the chauffeur and sort of mysterious third figure, that each of them have their own colors and their own treatments. And what you start to get is each of their perspectives. And that is the biggest departure that this takes, both from the original and from the traditional noir. The traditional noir, as elevated and created by Chandler, is the detective story. You're told everything from the point of view of the detective, and the detective is typically a alpha cis 40-something white guy played by a movie star. And that's great. But those guys see the world in one way, whereas the female lead was going to see, particularly in 1940s Los Angeles, is going to see the world in a different way. And the black chauffeur is going to see the world in a third way. And to me, there was an opportunity here to completely honor the moral complexity that is always in Chandler, but to open up the lens a little bit and see other people's perspectives. And so that's sort of the big process innovation, is we move, in my version, from the singular point of view of the detective, then across to the femme fatale's point of view, then across to the chauffeur's point of view, and back again. So we're sort of playing a game of tennis where everyone has their own agendas and everyone has their own viewpoints and their own grievances and their own worldviews.
Well, that is just brilliant because I do think about those issues. We're revisiting the classics in this new era we're in, and we're retelling stories from the other characters. And this, I don't even think about that. I mean, of course I think about it, but it's done in a seamless way, um, and a very balanced way. I don't know. You know what I'm getting at. It's just brilliantly done. And of course, I'm just speaking the obvious, but I love this reference to Musso and Frank's, that little local flavor, that specific local flavor.
Been there for 102 years. So
Yes, yes, the oldest ongoing restaurant in Hollywood, and
uh, I've had many happy meals there, and I thought, and more happy cocktails. And I think,
yes, me too. And it's that again is an effortless thing going on. It's so unpretentious
well,
from my point of view.
I hope so. I mean, it is, look, it's true to its world, right? It's true to its time, but not everyone's life was glamorous. Not everyone's apartment was beautifully decorated.
Oh, sure.
That's what lets and sort of by switching from the points of view, of course, the glamour is still there. It has to be, and of course, the characters aren't sort of artificially something they're not or out of their time, but too much of the time has been told to eclipse narratives that were there, and so this is a very sort of minor correction. And when we look back at the Los Angeles of 1940, it was a pretty complicated place. It was morally gray. It was multicultural. It had different social currents running. It had the aftermath, the sort of optimism of the Great Society post World War II, but also a lot of very traumatized people walking about. It had a lot going on.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I love the collaborative results. The lettering, which sometimes gets overlooked by folks, it's just so exquisite. I love how it overlaps, and the reader can easily follow along, and you get lost in the conversation. It just is such an enjoyable way that it's been put together.
No, I mean, Taylor's done an amazing job, and it's a real challenge because there's a lot of dialogue. There is a lot of dialogue, and the dialogue is so beautiful, you don't want to cut too much of it. And there's a lot of plot. But as you say, yes, we wanted it to have that sort of, wanted it to feel like the rat-a-tat-tat of the movies, off Double Indemnity, off an Aaron Sorkin movie. And the way to do that in writing is to make sure that the balloons are in the right place all the time.
What I found funny when I was looking back at the original, because it's four short stories in the original with the eponymous, am I using the title correct? The eponymous title being Trouble is My Business. Um, and there's the introduction by Raymond Chandler, and he's dismissing his work, which all the great writers do. They're so self-deprecating. And it says Raymond Chandler, La Jolla, 1950, which is just I can just imagine him as a fixture in La Jolla looking back and saying, "Oh, it's not such a big deal what I had accomplished."
I think with Chandler, there's always an element of disingenuousness. I think he knew he was a great, but I think he felt unappreciated because he was working in genre. He never felt he was taken seriously enough by the literary guys. And then he sort of got chewed up by Hollywood. Even though he had success, he also famously, had a very unhappy collaboration with Hitchcock when he wrote the first draft of the lady first draft of Strangers on the Train, and Hitchcock famously called him in for a meeting, picked up the draft, and dropped it in the trash can in front of him. So
Oh, yes. I remember that I was just reading about that the other day, like maybe 3 or 4 days ago. Anyway,
so I think by the end of his life, which his wife had died. He was drinking too much. Chandler was not a happy man by the end of his life. One of the great tragedies is, like so many other great artists, he didn't feel fully appreciated or successful in his own lifetime. And so I think that introduction is sort of a backward swipe at that. I think he knew. I think in his heart of hearts, he knew he had created something of greatness that would last.
yeah. Well, I wanted to comment on the length of the book. It's about 100 pages. The actual short story is about 50 pages, so it almost evens out to 2 pages of graphic novel for 1 page of short story. And I think it's a really um, tidy, ideal page count. I think it's more European in some ways. I think that Europeans are more used to a shorter graphic novel. I think in America, a lot of the time, the graphic novelist is aiming for 200 plus pages, and then 300 or more, and you're reaching into epic territory. But I think with 100, it's such a delightful, manageable page count for everyone involved, the creators and the reader. But do you have any thoughts on that?
It just felt the right length for the story. As you say, the original story is only 50 pages. It's a novella at most, a long short story, really. And so I didn't drag it out any longer than it wanted to be. I made space for the new character backstories and the sort of interweaving of them. And there's a little bit of a coda that's not there in the original, and there's a little bit of a preface that's not there in the original. But essentially, he wrote what he wrote, and my job and the artist's job was to give it its finest expression in graphic novels, not to kind of drag it out into something that it's not. Um, if we have another go and do one of the big books, it'll be longer. If you're adapting Lady in the Lake or The High Window or The Little Sister, those are full-length novels. They'll take a few more pages, but this one was very happy being what it was.
Well, I wish you the very best with this book. What I like to tell folks about graphic novels is if you have any prejudice, I think maybe I hope we're getting past that, that it's not for the literate. It is very much for the literate. It's a reader's paradise to be able to get this interpretation, to read both. You should read both, the short story and the graphic novel. So well, there's so much more I could say. I don't know if there's maybe some closing thoughts. Your background is so impressive, to say the least. The whole thing with Douglas Adams and with uh, Alison Morissette, all of these things in your life, I'm sure that they managed to contribute something as you were working on this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, completely. Well, look, I'm very lucky. I spent a lot of my life adapting and reinterpreting and bringing to a modern audience the stuff that I loved as a kid and as a teenager. And Raymond Chandler is very much in that category, as was Douglas Adams, with whom my career started. And there is sort of a link, actually. If you want a sort of silly closing uh, Shaggy Dog story, let me try and link Douglas Adams with Raymond Chandler. Now, there is a sort of one obvious link that Douglas also created a noirish detective called Dirk Gently of Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency. And I have adapted those novels both as graphic novels and for television. And the graphic novels I did with Ilias. So we have reunited here for another detective adventure. So that's a very simple link. Here's a more complicated one. Douglas's great hero, the author to whom he traced his style and to whom he aspired in every way, was actually not a science fiction author, but was the great British comic novelist P.G. Wodehouse, creator of Jeeves and Wooster and Smith and Lord Emsworth and so on. And Plum, as he is known to those of us who love him, Plum is another 20th century master of prose style. How does this all link to Chandler, you ask? This links to Chandler because Chandler's style and Wodehouse's style are surprisingly similar, even though they apparently write in very different genres. One is a sort of comic novelist of British country house farce. The other is the creator of hard-boiled detective noir. They actually, on the level of the sentence, are both masters of simile, of metaphor, of unexpected transferred epithet. They have very similar Latinate sentence structure, and they also both write variations on a theme. Now, this sounds like I'm just blowing a lot of smoke up my own literary ass. Here's why it links. P.G. Wodehouse, Douglas Adams's favorite author, and Raymond Chandler were at school together.
Oh, wow.
They both attended a British school called Dulwich College. And even though they only overlapped by one term and there's no one semester and there's no huge evidence of them being friends, what is absolutely clear is they were taught by the same teachers. And they were taught in particular by two great classical teachers, Latin and Greek. And they both in their lives attributed their style to the classical training that they had at high school. And so that's how you get from Douglas Adams to Raymond Chandler via P.G. Wodehouse.
Well, what a gift. What a gift for them. Oh, we're going to have to end it there, right? Thank you. Thank you for taking the time. And Raymond Chandler, Trouble is My Business. Everyone, please seek this out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Henry. It's been a pleasure.